The wooden doors of the clan hall slammed open, and Kaya felt every eye in the room turn toward her before she had even taken a single step inside. Torchlight flickered against stone walls, and the air smelled of smoke and boiled meat. She had been summoned without warning, pulled from her chores by two guards who would not meet her gaze, and now she understood why. Alpha Rowan Ashford stood at the far end of the hall, his arms crossed, his expression carved from ice. Beside him stood his council, a row of stern faces that had judged her before she had said a single word. Kaya's heart pounded as she walked forward, her boots echoing against the floor, each step feeling heavier than the last. "Kaya of the Ashford clan," Rowan said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "You stand accused of dishonoring this pack." Kaya's breath caught. She had done nothing. She had spent the last 3 years tending to the sick, caring for pups who were not her own, working herself to exhaustion for a clan that had never once thanked her. She opened her mouth to speak, but Rowan raised a hand, silencing her before she could utter a single word. "Your mother's blood runs weak," he continued, his tone cold and final. "You carry the mark of an Omega who cannot be trusted. I will not have you poison the bloodline of this pack any longer." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kaya felt her knees weaken, but she refused to fall. She had learned long ago that showing weakness in front of wolves who despised her only invited more cruelty. She lifted her chin and looked directly at the Alpha who had once promised, in quieter days, that she would always have a place among his people. "I have given everything to this pack," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I have nursed your sick. I have buried your dead. I have never once asked for anything in return. And yet you remain unclaimed," Rowan snapped. "No Alpha wants you. No Beta wants you. You are a burden this pack can no longer carry." The words struck harder than any blow could have. Kaya felt the weight of every stare, every whisper, every judgment that had followed her since childhood. She had been born different, an Omega, without the soft compliance the others expected of her kind, and for that, she had been punished again and again. "Take off your cloak," Rowan ordered. "It bears the mark of this clan. You no longer deserve to wear it." Kaya's fingers trembled as she unclasped the heavy wool cloak from her shoulders. It had belonged to her mother, one of the last things she owned that connected her to a family long gone. She let it fall to the floor, refusing to let the tears building behind her eyes fall in front of these people. "You are banished from Ashford lands," Rowan declared. "If you are found within our borders after sunset, you will be treated as an enemy." The council murmured their agreement, some faces showing pity, most showing relief, that the trouble embodied in Kaya's presence would soon be gone. She turned without another word, walking through the parting crowd, her spine straight even as her world crumbled beneath her feet. Outside, the cold air hit her like a slap. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the ground in a thin white layer that would soon turn to ice. Kaya stood on the steps of the hall for a long moment, staring out at the dark forest that bordered the clan's territory, the forest that separated her old life from whatever waited beyond. She had nothing, no pack, no protection, no home, but she also had nothing left to lose, and there was a strange, terrible freedom in that thought. Kaya walked through the village one final time, past the homes she had visited, the children she had cared for, the elders who had once smiled at her, before fear of the Alpha's judgment silenced their kindness. No one came to say goodbye. No one dared. By the time she reached the edge of the territory, the snow had thickened into a steady fall, and the sky had turned the deep gray of an approaching storm. Kaya paused at the boundary marker, an old stone carved with the symbol of the Ashford clan, and looked back one last time at the only home she had ever known. Then she turned and walked into the unknown. The forest swallowed her within minutes, the trees rising tall and dark on either side of the narrow path. Kaya had never ventured this far from the village before. She knew, vaguely, that beyond these woods lay other territories, other packs, lands ruled by Alphas whose names were spoken with caution around Ashford fires. She did not know which direction led to safety, or if such a place even existed for someone like her. Hours passed. The cold seeped into her bones, and her thin traveling clothes did little to protect her from the wind that howled between the trees. She pressed forward anyway, driven by a stubbornness that had kept her alive through years of scorn and isolation. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the look on Rowan's face when he cast her out, and she could not bear that yet. As night fell fully, Kaya found a hollow beneath the roots of an ancient oak and curled into it, using what remained of her strength to gather dry leaves for warmth. She did not sleep so much as drift in and out of exhausted awareness, her ears straining for the sound of predators, her body shivering despite her best efforts to stay warm. When dawn finally broke, gray and cold, Kaya forced herself back onto her feet. Her stomach ached with hunger, and her lips had cracked from the cold, but she pushed forward, following the path deeper into unfamiliar territory. She found a stream and drank from it, cupping the icy water in her hands, grateful for even that small mercy. By midday, the forest began to change. The trees grew sparser, and Kaya caught glimpses of smoke rising in the distance, dark plumes against the pale sky. She approached cautiously, uncertain whether she was walking toward salvation or further danger. As she crested a low hill, she stopped, breath catching in her throat. Below her stretched a settlement unlike anything she had seen before. Longhouses with steep, curved roofs lined a wide central path, their wooden beams carved with images of wolves and waves and ancient symbols she did not recognize. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sound of hammers striking metal echoed from a forge near the settlement's edge. Beyond the village, she could see the glint of a great river, and further still, what looked like the masts of ships. This was not Ashford land. This was not any territory she recognized from stories told around the fire. Kaya had heard whispers of a kingdom to the north, ruled by wolves descended from ancient warriors who had crossed frozen seas centuries ago. Wolves who called themselves the children of ice and iron. She had never imagined she would stand at the edge of their lands, cold and starving, and utterly alone. She hesitated at the top of the hill, torn between the desperate need for shelter and the fear of walking into a place where she knew no one and had no claim to safety. But the wind cut through her clothing like knives, and her body trembled uncontrollably now, and she understood with grim clarity that she would not survive another night in the open. Kaya began to descend the hill. She had not gone far when a low growl stopped her in her tracks. From the tree line to her left emerged a massive gray wolf, its eyes locked on her with predatory focus. Kaya froze, every instinct screaming at her to run, but she knew better than to flee from a wolf twice her size. She held perfectly still, lowering her gaze in submission, hoping the gesture would be enough to avoid confrontation. The wolf circled her slowly, sniffing the air, clearly assessing whether she posed any threat. After a long, tense moment, it let out a sharp bark, and within seconds, 2 more wolves emerged from the trees, followed by a group of armed men on foot, their cloaks lined with fur, their faces hard and watchful. "An intruder," one of the men said, stepping forward with a spear raised. "Unclaimed, by the smell of her." Kaya raised her hands slowly, showing she carried no weapon. "I mean no harm," she said, her voice hoarse from cold and exhaustion. "I was cast out from my clan. I am only looking for shelter." The men exchanged glances, clearly suspicious. One of them, an older man with a graying beard and sharp eyes, stepped closer, studying her with open scrutiny. "Cast out," he repeated. "For what crime?" "For being born an Omega who did not know her place," Kaya answered honestly, too tired to soften the truth. "I have no pack, no home, and no intention of causing trouble. I only need somewhere to rest until I regain my strength." The older man considered her for a long moment, before turning to the others. "Bring her to the keep," he said finally. "The king will decide what to do with her." Kaya's stomach twisted with fear at the mention of a king, but she had no choice except to follow. The wolves flanked her on either side as the men led her down the hill and into the settlement, past curious villagers who stopped their work to stare at the stranger being escorted through their streets. The keep rose at the center of the village, a massive wooden structure, reinforced with stone, far grander than anything Kaya had seen in Ashford territory. Guards stood at its entrance, and as she approached, the heavy doors swung open, revealing a great hall, lit by roaring fires, and lined with long tables. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a raised chair carved from dark wood, sat a man who radiated authority so powerful that Kaya felt it press against her skin, even before she looked at his face. When she finally lifted her eyes to meet his, she found herself staring into a gaze so intense it nearly stole the breath from her lungs. He was broad and tall, his shoulders wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, his dark hair pulled back from a face marked by both youth and hardship. A thin scar ran along his jaw, and his eyes, pale as winter ice, studied her with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see straight through every wall she had built around herself. This, she realized with a sinking feeling, could only be the Alpha King. "Who is this?" the king asked, his voice deep and commanding, echoing through the silent hall. "An unclaimed Omega, my king," the older guard answered. "Found at the northern border, she claims to have been cast out from a southern clan." The king rose from his seat, and Kaya felt her pulse quicken as he descended the steps toward her, each movement measured and deliberate, like a predator assessing prey. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes, close enough to smell the faint scent of leather and smoke that clung to him. "What is your name?" he asked. "Kaya," she answered, refusing to let her voice waver despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "And why should I allow a stray from another territory to remain within my walls?" His tone was not cruel, but it carried no warmth either, only the flat assessment of a ruler weighing risk against benefit. Kaya lifted her chin, drawing on the same stubborn pride that had carried her through years of humiliation. "I ask for nothing more than shelter until the storm passes," she said. "I will work for my keep. I will cause no trouble. And if you decide I am not welcome, I will leave without protest." The king studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Kaya noticed two small figures peering out from behind a tapestry near the hearth, twin children with the same pale eyes as the king, watching the exchange with wide, curious stares. She wondered, briefly, who they belonged to, before the king's voice pulled her attention back. "You may stay in the servants' quarters until the storm clears," he said finally. "But know this. My hospitality does not extend to trust. You will be watched." Relief flooded through Kaya, so overwhelming that her legs nearly buckled beneath her. "Thank you," she managed to say. The king turned away without another word, climbing back toward his chair, already dismissing her from his attention. But as the guards led Kaya toward the servants' quarters, she glanced back once more, and found the king watching her retreat with an expression she could not quite name, something between curiosity and wariness, as though he sensed that her arrival would change something within these walls, whether he wished it to or not. Kaya did not know, as she stepped into the small room she would call her shelter for the night, that the twin children who had watched her from behind the tapestry would soon become the center of her entire world. She did not know that the king who had greeted her with cold suspicion would one day look at her with a warmth she had never known from anyone. All she knew, as exhaustion finally overtook her, and she sank onto a thin straw mattress, was that for the first time in days, she was no longer standing alone in the snow. Outside, the storm raged on through the night, wind howling against the wooden walls of the keep. But inside, Kaya slept, safe for the moment, unaware that her arrival had already set into motion events that would test her courage, break her heart, and ultimately give her something she had never dared to hope for again. A home, a family, and a king who would learn to love her not, despite her scars, but because of the strength that had carried her through them. Morning came slow and pale through a narrow window, and Kaya woke to the sound of voices arguing somewhere beyond her door. She sat up on the thin mattress, muscles aching from the long journey through the forest, and listened. "She should not be here," a woman's voice hissed. "We know nothing of her. She could be a spy, sent by the southern clans." "The guards searched her," a man replied. "She carries no weapon, no message, nothing that marks her as a threat." "That means nothing. Words can be carried in a mind as easily as on parchment." Kaya rose quietly and pressed her ear closer to the door, her heart thudding. She recognized the second voice as belonging to the older guard who had brought her to the keep the previous night. The woman's voice was unfamiliar, sharp, and clipped with authority. "The king has made his decision," the guard said firmly. "She stays until the storm passes. After that, it is his choice whether she remains longer." "His decisions have grown strange since Freya died," the woman muttered, her voice dropping lower, though not low enough to escape Kaya's hearing. "He barely speaks to his own council anymore. Now he brings home strays from the forest." Footsteps retreated, and Kaya stepped back from the door, processing what she had heard. Freya, the king's mate, she assumed, and from the way the woman had spoken, her death had left a wound that had not yet healed. That would explain the exhaustion she had glimpsed in his eyes, the guarded distance in his voice. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Kaya opened the door to find a young woman with kind eyes and flour dusted across her apron, holding a bowl of warm porridge. "I am Ellen," the woman said, offering a small smile. "I work in the kitchens. I thought you might be hungry." Kaya accepted the bowl gratefully, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. "Thank you, I am Kaya." "I know," Ellen said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "Word travels fast in a keep this size. Everyone is talking about the Omega the king brought in from the storm." "Not kindly, I imagine," Kaya said, thinking of the woman's voice she had overheard. Ellen's expression turned sympathetic. "Some are curious, some are wary. It has been a difficult year for this kingdom. The queen's passing left more than grief behind. It left uncertainty. People fear change, and you arrived like a sign of it, whether that is fair to you or not." Kaya ate slowly, considering the young woman's words. "The children," she said carefully. "I saw 2 of them last night, watching from behind a curtain." "The king's twins," Ellen confirmed, her voice softening. "Prince Eric and Princess Elsa. They are barely 5 years old, and they lost their mother far too young. They rarely leave the keep, and even more rarely do they show themselves to strangers. If they watched you, that means something." Before Kaya could ask what she meant, a commotion erupted somewhere outside, shouts and the frantic ringing of a bell. Ellen's face paled instantly. "That is the alarm bell," she said, already moving toward the door. "Something is wrong." Kaya followed without thinking, driven by an instinct she could not explain. They emerged into the main corridor, just as guards rushed past them toward the eastern wing of the keep, weapons drawn, faces tight with urgency. Ellen grabbed the sleeve of a passing guard. "What is happening?" "Raiders," the guard answered breathlessly. "They breached the eastern gate. The king is already moving to defend the walls, but some may have slipped through toward the keep." Kaya's blood ran cold. The children. If raiders had breached the outer defenses, and the king and his warriors were occupied at the walls, the keep itself, where the twins remained, could be vulnerable. "Where are the prince and princess?" Kaya asked urgently. Ellen's eyes widened with sudden fear. "Their chambers, likely, with their nurse. But she is elderly, and if raiders reach that wing..." Kaya did not wait to hear the rest. She turned and ran, following the direction Ellen pointed, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had no weapon, no training in combat, nothing but the desperate need to reach those children before danger did. She sprinted through corridors, lined with tapestries, past startled servants who called after her in confusion, until she reached a heavy wooden door at the end of a quiet hallway. She pushed it open without hesitation. Inside, an elderly woman lay slumped against the wall, unconscious but breathing, a thin trail of blood at her temple. Near the far window, 2 small figures huddled together, eyes wide with terror, as a man in dark, unfamiliar armor advanced toward them with a blade drawn. Kaya did not think, she simply moved. She grabbed the first object within reach, a heavy iron candle stand, and swung it with every ounce of strength she possessed. The impact struck the intruder across the shoulder, hard enough to make him stagger and turn his attention away from the children. "Run!" Kaya shouted at the twins. "Get behind me, now!" The children scrambled to obey, pressing themselves against the wall behind her as the raider recovered his balance and turned his full, furious attention toward her. He was easily twice her size, his face hidden behind a leather mask, his blade gleaming in the dim light. Kaya raised the candle stand again, positioning herself firmly between the intruder and the terrified twins. Her arms trembled with effort, her body screaming that she stood no real chance against an armed warrior, but she did not move, did not step aside, did not allow fear to loosen her grip. "You will not touch them," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The raider lunged. Kaya twisted aside just enough to avoid the worst of the blow, the blade grazing across her forearm instead of finding its intended mark. Pain seared through her, hot and immediate, but she gritted her teeth and swung the candle stand again, catching the man across the back of his knee. He stumbled, cursing, and Kaya used the moment to shove the twins further behind the overturned bed frame, creating what little barrier she could between them and the danger. Her arm throbbed, blood soaking through her sleeve, but she kept her focus locked on the raider as he righted himself and advanced once more. She had no illusions about winning this fight through strength alone, but she had something else, a fierce, unrelenting will to protect these children, who had done nothing to deserve the danger stalking toward them. She would not fail them the way the world had so often failed her. The raider swung again, and this time Kaya barely managed to block the blow with the candle stand, the force of the impact rattling through her bones and knocking the makeshift weapon from her grip. She stumbled backward, positioning her own body directly in front of the twins, refusing to give ground even as the man raised his blade for what looked like a final strike. The door burst open with a deafening crash. King Bjorn filled the doorway, his chest heaving from exertion, his eyes blazing with a fury so intense that even the raider hesitated. Before the intruder could react, the king crossed the room in 3 long strides and struck him down with brutal efficiency, ending the threat in a matter of seconds. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the ragged breathing of everyone present. Bjorn turned immediately toward his children, dropping to his knees and pulling them both into his arms, checking them frantically for any sign of injury. "We are fine, Papa," the little girl whispered, her small voice trembling. "She protected us. Kaya protected us." Bjorn's head snapped up, his gaze finding Kaya where she still stood, swaying slightly from blood loss and exhaustion, her forearm slick with red. Something shifted in his expression, the cold suspicion from the night before replaced by something far more complicated, something that looked almost like disbelief. "You are injured," he said, rising to his feet and crossing the distance between them in an instant. "It is only a cut," Kaya said, though the room had begun to spin slightly around her. "The children, are they truly unharmed?" "Because of you," Bjorn said quietly, his voice rough with an emotion he seemed unwilling to name. "You had no reason to run toward danger. You owed my family nothing." Kaya opened her mouth to answer, but the room tilted sharply, and darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. The last thing she registered before consciousness slipped away was the sensation of strong arms catching her before she could fall, and a deep voice calling her name with an urgency that surprised her, even as everything faded to black. Kaya woke to warmth and the soft crackle of a fire nearby. For a moment, she did not know where she was, and the unfamiliar ceiling above her sent a jolt of panic through her chest before memory returned in a rush. The raider, the children, the blade slicing across her arm. She sat up too quickly, wincing as pain flared along her forearm, now wrapped tightly in clean linen. She was lying in a bed far grander than the straw mattress she had slept on the previous night, the blankets soft and thick, the room warmed by a stone hearth crackling with fresh logs. "You should rest," a voice said from near the window. Kaya turned to find King Bjorn seated in a wooden chair, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable in the firelight. He looked as though he had not slept, dark shadows deepening beneath his eyes, his usually composed bearing frayed at the edges. "The children," Kaya said immediately. "Are they safe?" "Safe, and asking after you constantly," Bjorn said, a faint, weary smile touching his mouth for the first time since she had met him. "My daughter has already declared you her favorite person in the entire keep, much to the annoyance of her nurse." Relief washed through Kaya, loosening something tight in her chest. "I am glad. I could not have forgiven myself if anything had happened to them." Bjorn studied her for a long moment, his pale eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle she had not realized she presented. "You do not know me," he said finally. "You owe my family nothing. Yet you ran toward danger without hesitation, armed with nothing but a candle stand, to protect children who are not your own." "They were children in danger," Kaya said simply. "That was reason enough." "Not for most," Bjorn said quietly. "Most would have fled, or hidden, or waited for someone else to act. You did neither." Kaya shifted uncomfortably beneath the weight of his gaze, unused to being looked at with anything resembling admiration. In Ashford territory, she had been invisible at best and despised at worst. This unfamiliar attention left her uncertain how to respond. "How is your arm?" Bjorn asked, apparently sensing her discomfort and choosing to shift the subject. "It aches, but it will heal," Kaya said. I have tended worse wounds on others. I know what a healthy recovery looks like. You have healing skills? Bjorn's brow lifted with interest. I cared for the sick in my former clan, Kaya said, a flicker of old pain crossing her face before she could suppress it. It was one of the few things they allowed me to do freely. Bjorn seemed to notice the shift in her expression, but did not press further, and Kaya found herself grateful for his restraint. You will remain here until your wound heals fully, he said instead. That is not a request. I do not wish to be a burden, Kaya said quickly. You saved my children's lives, Bjorn said, his voice firming with something close to command. You will recover under this roof, and you will be cared for properly. This is not a debate. Before Kaya could argue further, the door burst open, and two small figures rushed into the room, followed by an out-of-breath nurse, trying and failing to catch them. Kaya, the little girl exclaimed, climbing onto the edge of the bed without hesitation, her twin brother close behind her, though he hung back slightly, watching Kaya with a more cautious, evaluating stare. Elsa, be gentle, Bjorn warned, though his voice carried more amusement than sternness. She is still healing. I am fine, Kaya assured him, smiling despite herself as Elsa settled beside her, studying the bandage on her arm with wide, curious eyes. Does it hurt very much? Elsa asked. Only a little, Kaya said, but it was worth it, to keep you and your brother safe. The boy, Eric, finally stepped closer, his expression solemn beyond his years. You fought the bad man, he said quietly, even though you were scared. I was very scared, Kaya admitted honestly, but sometimes being scared does not stop us from doing what needs to be done. Eric considered this for a long moment before nodding, as though filing the lesson away carefully. Then, to Kaya's surprise, he climbed onto the bed as well, settling on her uninjured side, his small shoulder pressing against hers with the trusting ease of a child who had decided, without ceremony, that she belonged. Bjorn watched the scene unfold with an expression Kaya could not fully interpret, something caught between wonder and old grief, as though watching his children so easily accept a stranger stirred memories he usually kept carefully guarded. They have not warmed to anyone this quickly since their mother passed, he said quietly, almost to himself. Kaya did not know how to respond to that, so she simply reached out and gently smoothed a stray lock of hair from Elsa's forehead, a gesture instinctive and tender. The little girl leaned into the touch, and something in Kaya's chest ached with a longing she had not allowed herself to feel in years, the longing to belong somewhere, to matter to someone, to be needed rather than discarded. Over the following days, as her arm healed beneath careful bandaging, Kaya found herself increasingly drawn into the rhythm of the keep. The twins sought her out constantly, following her through the corridors, insisting she join them for meals, begging her for stories in the evenings. Ellen, the kitchen maid, became a steady friend, sharing gossip and gentle guidance about the customs of the Northern Kingdom. Not everyone welcomed her presence so warmly. She caught the sharp, suspicious glances of certain council members, overheard whispered conversations that fell silent whenever she approached. The woman whose voice she had first heard arguing outside her door, she soon learned, was named Solveig, a senior advisor to the king who viewed Kaya's continued presence with open distrust. An unclaimed Omega with no history, no clan willing to vouch for her, embedded within the royal household, Solveig said one evening, her voice carrying clearly across the great hall, as Kaya entered, unnoticed by the small group of advisors gathered near the fire. It is reckless, my king. We know nothing of her true intentions. She saved my children's lives, Bjorn replied, his tone carrying a warning edge that made the other advisors shift uncomfortably. That is not the action of someone harboring ill intent. Or it is precisely the action someone clever enough would take to earn your trust, Solveig countered. I am not suggesting she be cast out cruelly. I am suggesting caution, nothing more. Kaya retreated quietly, before anyone noticed her presence, her chest tight, with a familiar, painful mixture of hurt and resignation. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that saving the twins might have earned her some measure of acceptance within these walls, but old wounds ran deep, and she understood, better than most, how quickly gratitude could curdle into suspicion when fear took root. That night, unable to sleep, Kaya wandered out onto a quiet balcony, overlooking the frozen river, beyond the keep's walls. The stars stretched brilliant and endless above her, and the cold air felt clean against her skin after the tense atmosphere of the great hall. "You should be resting," a familiar voice said from behind her. Kaya turned to find Bjorn standing in the doorway, a thick fur draped over his shoulders, his expression softened by the moonlight. "I could say the same to you, my king." "Bjorn," he corrected, stepping onto the balcony beside her. "Within these walls, when we speak as ourselves rather than as ruler and stranger, you may call me by my name." Kaya glanced at him, surprised by the offer. That seems a significant shift from the man who threatened to watch me constantly for signs of betrayal. A faint, wry smile touched his lips. "Perhaps I have reconsidered certain assumptions." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the frozen river glinting silver beneath the starlight. "I overheard Solveig's concerns," Kaya admitted finally, unwilling to pretend otherwise. "She is not wrong to be cautious. You know nothing of me beyond a single act." "I know enough," Bjorn said quietly. "I know you ran toward danger when you had every reason to run away. I know my children trust you completely, and they are far better judges of character than any advisor twice their age. And I know that whatever cruelty you suffered before arriving here left marks you still carry. Marks that have nothing to do with deception, and everything to do with survival." Kaya's breath caught at how precisely he had read her, this man she had known for barely a handful of days. "You see quite a lot, for someone who claims to know nothing of me." "I have learned to read people carefully," Bjorn said, his gaze drifting toward the river. "It is a skill grief teaches, whether you wish to learn it or not." "Your mate," Kaya said gently, treading carefully into territory she sensed remained painfully tender. "Ellen mentioned she passed." Bjorn's jaw tightened, but he did not deflect the question. "Freya died bringing Eric and Elsa into this world, 2 years ago now, though some days it feels as though it happened yesterday, and other days it feels as though it happened a lifetime ago." "I am sorry," Kaya said softly. "You need not apologize," Bjorn said. "You did not cause that grief. You have, if anything, brought something unexpected into this keep since your arrival. Laughter, from my children, that I feared I might never hear again so freely." Kaya did not know how to respond to such an admission, so she simply remained beside him, watching the frozen river below, feeling the weight of his presence beside her, like something both comforting and unsettling in equal measure. She had come to this kingdom seeking nothing more than shelter from a storm. She had not expected to find herself standing beside its king, feeling the fragile beginnings of something she had never dared to hope for in her entire life. Belonging. Weeks passed, and the wound on Kaya's arm faded into a thin, pale scar, though the storm outside the keep's walls had long since cleared. She found herself still there, still welcomed, though the reason for her continued presence had grown less certain and more complicated with each passing day. She had taken to helping in the healing quarters, where an elderly healer named Margit taught her the northern methods of treating illness and injury, methods that differed in small but fascinating ways from what she had learned in Ashford territory. Kaya absorbed the knowledge eagerly, grateful for purpose, grateful for something to occupy her hands and mind beyond the constant, quiet ache of uncertainty about her future. The twins remained inseparable from her, insisting she join them for morning lessons, evening meals, and the quiet moments before bed, when Elsa demanded stories, and Eric pretended he was too old for such things, while listening just as intently as his sister. Kaya had never imagined she would find such uncomplicated joy in caring for children who were not her own, but something about their unguarded acceptance healed a part of her that years of rejection had left raw and aching. Bjorn, too, had begun seeking her out more frequently, though their conversations remained carefully bounded by propriety and unspoken caution. He would find her in the healing quarters in the late afternoons, offering brief updates on kingdom matters, or join her and the twins during evening meals, his usually guarded expression softening in ways Kaya noticed but did not dare name. Not everyone approved of this growing familiarity. "The council grows restless," Ellen confided one morning as she helped Kaya sort dried herbs into labeled jars. "Solveig has been pressing the king about a marriage alliance with the Eastern Territories. She believes it would strengthen our position against raiders and secure peace for the kingdom." Kaya's hands stilled over the herbs, an unexpected pang of something uncomfortable settling in her chest. "That seems a wise strategy," for a kingdom facing threats from multiple directions. Perhaps, Ellen said carefully, watching her friend's reaction with knowing eyes, though the king has shown little enthusiasm for the idea, from what I have heard. He has duties beyond his own preferences, Kaya said, forcing her voice to remain steady. As any ruler must. Ellen said nothing further, though her expression suggested she understood far more about the tangled feelings developing beneath Kaya's careful composure than Kaya herself was willing to admit aloud. That evening, Kaya found herself summoned to the king's study, a request delivered by a guard, whose expression gave no indication of what awaited her. She arrived to find Bjorn, standing near a large table covered in maps, his expression troubled, deep lines of concern etched across his forehead. "You wish to see me," Kaya said, stepping inside as the guard closed the door behind her. "There have been further raids along the eastern border," Bjorn said without preamble, gesturing toward the map spread before him. "Small settlements mostly, but the pattern suggests coordination rather than random opportunism. Someone is testing our defenses, probing for weakness." Kaya moved closer, studying the marked locations on the map, unfamiliar with the geography, but understanding the grim implications well enough. "Do you know who is responsible?" "Suspicions, but no certainty," Bjorn said, his jaw tight with frustration. "It could be southern clans testing whether my kingdom has grown vulnerable since Freya's passing. It could be opportunists seeking easy plunder, or it could be something more organized, a threat building toward something larger." "What does your council advise?" Kaya asked. Bjorn's expression darkened further. "Solvig believes a marriage alliance with the Eastern Territories would deter further aggression, presenting a unified front too costly for any enemy to challenge." Kaya kept her expression carefully neutral, though the words landed with more weight than she wished to admit. "That seems a reasonable strategy, politically speaking." "Reasonable, perhaps," Bjorn said, his pale eyes lifting to meet hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But strategy is not the only consideration a king must weigh, however much my council might wish otherwise." Kaya held his gaze, uncertain what he wanted her to say, uncertain what she was even permitted to feel, given the vast gulf separating an unclaimed Omega, without a clan, from a ruling Alpha King, with a kingdom's future resting on his decisions. "Why did you summon me here, truly?" she asked finally, unable to bear the weighted silence any longer. "Surely not simply to discuss border raids and marriage strategies with someone outside your council." Bjorn was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching her face, as though weighing how much honesty he dared offer. "I find myself valuing your perspective," he admitted finally, "more than I anticipated when you first arrived at my gates, half frozen and utterly alone." "I am no strategist," Kaya said softly. "I know nothing of kingdoms or politics, or the weight of ruling over thousands of lives." "No," Bjorn agreed, "but you understand courage. You understand sacrifice, without expectation of reward. Those are qualities I have found increasingly rare among those who surround me, cloaked instead in ambition and calculation." The vulnerability in his admission struck Kaya deeply, and she found herself stepping closer without fully deciding to do so, drawn by an instinct she could neither explain nor resist. "You carry a great deal alone," she said quietly. "More than any single person should have to bear." "I have carried it alone since Freya died," Bjorn admitted, his voice rough with an honesty he rarely allowed himself. "My children need a father who appears strong, unshaken, capable of protecting them from every danger. My kingdom needs a ruler who shows no weakness to enemies circling at our borders. There has been little room, these past 2 years, for anything resembling rest." "You do not have to carry everything alone," Kaya said, the words leaving her before she could consider whether she had any right to offer them. Bjorn's gaze sharpened, something shifting behind his pale eyes as he studied her, close enough now that Kaya could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the subtle flecks of gray woven through the pale blue of his irises. "Careful, Kaya," he said softly, his voice dropping to something low and rough. "You offer comfort I have not allowed myself to accept from anyone in a very long time." "Perhaps it is time you did," Kaya whispered, her heart pounding so loudly she felt certain he must hear it. For a long, charged moment, neither of them moved, the space between them thick with something neither had yet found the courage to name. Then, abruptly, a sharp knock at the door shattered the fragile intimacy of the moment, and Bjorn stepped back, clearing his throat, as a guard entered with an urgent message about scouts returning from the eastern border. Kaya excused herself quietly, her heart still racing as she made her way back toward her quarters, uncertain what exactly had passed between them, uncertain what she was allowed to hope for, uncertain whether hope itself was a dangerous indulgence for someone who had learned, time and again, that belonging could be stripped away without warning. She did not yet know that Solveig, watching from the shadows of an adjoining corridor, had witnessed enough of the exchange to grow far more determined to see the marriage alliance pursued, regardless of the growing bond forming between her king and the unclaimed Omega who had arrived, uninvited, into the heart of his kingdom. The summons came at dawn, delivered by a stern-faced guard, who offered no explanation, beyond instructions that Kaya present herself before the full council immediately. Kaya dressed quickly, her stomach twisting with unease, memories of another hall, another judgment, rising unbidden in her mind. The council chamber was smaller than the Great Hall but no less imposing, its walls lined with tapestries depicting battles long past, its long table surrounded by faces that regarded her with varying degrees of suspicion as she entered. Bjorn sat at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral, though Kaya noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands remained clenched atop the wooden surface before him. Solveig rose as Kaya entered, her expression sharp and unyielding. "Thank you for joining us," she said, her tone carrying no genuine warmth. "We have matters requiring your explanation." "I am happy to answer any questions," Kaya said carefully, though her pulse hammered with anxiety. "A messenger arrived this morning from the Southern Territories," Solveig continued, gesturing toward a sealed letter resting on the table. "From the Ashford clan specifically. It seems your former alpha has taken sudden interest in your whereabouts." Kaya's blood ran cold. "What does the letter say?" "That is precisely what concerns us," Solveig said. "The letter demands your immediate return, claiming you fled with stolen property belonging to the clan. It suggests, rather pointedly, that your presence here represents a theft this kingdom has unknowingly harbored." "That is a lie," Kaya said immediately, anger cutting through her fear. "I took nothing when I left Ashford territory beyond the clothes I wore. I was cast out, publicly and humiliatingly, for reasons that had nothing to do with theft." "Perhaps," Solveig said, though her tone remained skeptical. "Or perhaps there is truth we have not yet uncovered. Regardless, this letter creates a delicate situation. The Ashford clan is small, but they maintain alliances with several southern territories whose cooperation this kingdom values. Refusing their demand outright risks unnecessary conflict at a time when we can ill afford additional enemies." Kaya felt the walls closing in around her, the familiar sensation of being judged and found guilty before she had ever been given fair opportunity to defend herself. "I will not return to a clan that discarded me without cause," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "Whatever accusations they level against me are false, crafted only to justify demanding my return." "Why would they want you returned, if you hold no value to them?" another council member asked, his tone probing rather than hostile. Kaya considered the question carefully. "I do not know," she admitted honestly. "Perhaps my banishment created difficulties they did not anticipate. Perhaps someone within the clan has reconsidered the wisdom of casting aside someone with healing knowledge and no history of disloyalty. I cannot say with certainty what motivates their sudden interest." Bjorn had remained silent throughout the exchange, his expression giving away little, though Kaya could sense the careful control he exercised over his own reaction. Finally he spoke, his voice measured and deliberate. "This kingdom does not surrender those under its protection, based on unsubstantiated accusations delivered by messenger," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "If the Ashford clan wishes to pursue this matter further, they may send representatives to present their case formally, with evidence rather than empty claims." "My king," Solveig pressed, "I understand your inclination toward protection, but we must consider the broader implications. Refusing this demand outright risks alienating allies we cannot afford to lose, particularly given the recent raids along our eastern border. And granting their demand risks sending an innocent woman back into the hands of those who have already proven themselves willing to discard her without justice," Bjorn countered, his voice hardening. "I will not sacrifice someone under my protection to appease political convenience." The chamber fell into tense silence, the weight of the disagreement hanging heavily over the assembled council. Kaya stood frozen at the center of it all, acutely aware that her fate was being debated, as though she were merely a piece on a strategic board, rather than a person with feelings and fears of her own. "There is another consideration," Solveig said finally, her gaze shifting pointedly toward Kaya, before returning to the king. "The council has continued discussions regarding a marriage alliance with the Eastern Territories. Such an alliance would strengthen our position considerably, providing both military support against raiders and diplomatic leverage that might discourage the southern clans from pursuing further demands regarding Kaya's return." Kaya's chest tightened painfully at the reminder, the reality of political obligation pressing uncomfortably close against whatever fragile connection had begun forming between herself and the king. "The Eastern Alliance remains under consideration," Bjorn said, his tone carefully controlled, though Kaya caught the flicker of something troubled crossing his expression. "It has not been decided, nor will it be rushed, simply because circumstances have grown complicated. With respect, my king, circumstances demand decisive action," Solveig pressed. "We cannot afford prolonged uncertainty, while threats mount on multiple fronts." The council session continued for another hour, voices rising and falling in heated debate over strategy and diplomacy, while Kaya stood silently at the center of it all, feeling increasingly like a burden rather than a person, feeling the familiar, painful echo of her banishment from Ashford territory threatening to repeat itself in this unfamiliar kingdom. Finally, Bjorn called an end to the discussion, declaring that no decision regarding Kaya's fate or the Eastern marriage alliance would be made hastily. The council dispersed, though not without lingering glances of suspicion and calculation directed toward Kaya as they filed from the chamber. Kaya remained behind, uncertain whether she was permitted to leave, until only she and Bjorn remained in the now empty room. He crossed toward her slowly, his expression heavy with things unsaid. "I am sorry you had to endure that," he said quietly. "You defended me," Kaya said, still processing the events of the morning, "even against your own council's objections." "I could not do otherwise," Bjorn said simply. "Whatever accusations the Ashford clan levels against you, I do not believe them. I have watched you these past weeks. I have seen the person you truly are, not the fabricated villain their letter describes." "Thank you," Kaya whispered, though gratitude felt inadequate against the magnitude of what he had risked on her behalf. "But I must be honest with you," Bjorn continued, his voice growing heavier. "The pressure for a marriage alliance will not simply disappear. My kingdom faces genuine threats, and my council is not wrong that such an alliance could provide meaningful protection." Kaya felt her heart sink, though she forced herself to nod, understanding the weight of duty that rested upon a king's shoulders, understanding that whatever fragile connection had begun growing between them could not simply override the needs of an entire kingdom. "You must do what is necessary for your people," she said, though the words tasted bitter as she spoke them. Bjorn studied her for a long moment, his expression conflicted, torn visibly between duty and something else entirely, something neither of them had yet found the courage to fully acknowledge. "Necessary," he repeated quietly, "is not always the same as right." He left the chamber without further explanation, leaving Kaya standing alone, amid the remnants of a debate that had decided nothing definitively, yet had made painfully clear just how precarious her position within this kingdom truly remained, tangled as it was in threads of politics, suspicion, and a growing bond she had not intended to form, but could no longer deny existed. That night, unable to sleep, Kaya wandered once more to the balcony overlooking the frozen river, seeking the quiet solitude that had become her refuge within the keep. She did not expect company, and so she startled slightly when soft footsteps approached from behind. It was not Bjorn who joined her this time, but young Eric, wrapped in a thick fur cloak far too large for his small frame, his expression solemn in the moonlight. "You could not sleep either?" Kaya asked gently, kneeling to meet his eyes. Eric shook his head. "I heard the guards talking. About the letter. About sending you away." Kaya's chest tightened at the fear evident in his young voice. "I do not know what will happen," she admitted honestly, unwilling to offer false promises to a child who had already lost so much. "But know this, whatever occurs, the time we have shared has meant a great deal to me." "I do not want you to leave," Eric said, his composed facade finally cracking, revealing the frightened child beneath. Elsa does not want you to leave either. You make things feel less sad since Mama died. Kaya pulled him into a gentle embrace, her own eyes stinging with unshed tears. I will fight to stay, she promised softly, though she had no certainty such a promise was hers to keep, for as long as I am able. Above them, unseen by either, Bjorn watched from a nearby window, his heart aching at the sight of his son seeking comfort from the very woman his council wished to send away, his resolve hardening with each passing moment into a certainty he had not yet spoken aloud, even to himself. Whatever the cost, whatever political convenience demanded, he would not allow Kaya to be torn from this kingdom, from his children, or from him. 3 days passed in uneasy quiet. The council's debate over the Ashford letter left unresolved, as more urgent matters demanded attention. Scouts returned with troubling reports of increased raider activity along the eastern border, and Bjorn spent long hours locked in strategy discussions, leaving Kaya largely to her own devices within the keep. She threw herself into her work in the healing quarters, grateful for the distraction, though the uncertainty surrounding her future gnawed constantly at the edges of her thoughts. Margit, the elderly healer, had grown fond of her quick mind and steady hands, entrusting her with increasingly complex tasks as her knowledge expanded. It was during one such afternoon, as Kaya carefully measured dried herbs for a tonic meant to ease Margit's aching joints, that she noticed something troubling. A young kitchen servant, barely more than a child himself, had been sent to collect a meal tray intended for the twins' evening meal, and as Kaya glanced up from her work, she caught sight of the boy pausing near the tray, glancing nervously over his shoulder, before sprinkling something from a small pouch into the food. Kaya's blood ran cold. She set down her mortar and pestle immediately, moving with deliberate calm toward the boy, careful not to alert him to her suspicion until she could confirm what she had witnessed. That looks like a lovely meal, she said casually, stepping closer. The boy startled violently, nearly dropping the tray, his face draining of color as he registered her presence. I was only bringing this to the children's chambers, he stammered. Of course, Kaya said, keeping her voice light, even as her heart pounded with alarm. May I check the seasoning? I have been learning about the herbs used in northern cooking, and I would love to understand the preparation better. Panic flashed across the boy's face, unmistakable and damning. Before he could formulate a response, Kaya moved quickly, catching his wrist and preventing him from fleeing as she reached for the small pouch he had hastily tucked into his sleeve. What is this? She demanded, her voice sharp now, all pretense of casual conversation abandoned. Please, the boy whispered, tears welling in his eyes. Please, I did not want to do this. They threatened my family. They said if I did not do as instructed, my mother would suffer for it. Kaya's grip gentled slightly, understanding immediately that this frightened child was a victim rather than a true conspirator. Who threatened you? She asked urgently. Who gave you this substance? A stranger, the boy sobbed. He approached me in the village 3 days ago. He said he worked for someone powerful, someone who wanted the king's children removed from the succession. He gave me this pouch and told me to add it to their food, or my family would pay the price. Horror flooded through Kaya as she examined the contents of the pouch, recognizing the telltale color and texture of a substance Margit had taught her to identify, a poison capable of causing severe illness in small doses and death in larger ones. You must tell the king everything, Kaya said firmly, though her tone remained gentle, aware of how terrified the boy already was. He will protect your family. I promise you that. The boy nodded through his tears, and Kaya guided him quickly toward the great hall, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just discovered. Someone within or connected to the kingdom sought to harm the twins, someone with resources enough to threaten an innocent family into compliance. Bjorn's reaction upon hearing the news was immediate and fierce, his usual controlled composure shattering into something closer to barely contained fury as he questioned the trembling kitchen boy personally, his voice gentling considerably once he understood the depth of coercion the child had suffered. Your family will be protected, Bjorn promised, kneeling to meet the boy's frightened eyes directly. You have done the right thing by revealing this plot, and I will ensure no harm comes to those you love because of it. Once the boy had been escorted away to safety, Bjorn turned to Kaya, his expression a complicated mixture of gratitude and barely restrained alarm. You saved my children's lives once again, he said quietly. Had you not noticed his actions, had you not intervened? But I did, Kaya said firmly, cutting off the darker path his thoughts threatened to travel. The important matter now is discovering who orchestrated this plot, before they attempt another approach. Bjorn nodded grimly, already calling for his most trusted guards to investigate the stranger the boy had described. Though privately, Kaya suspected the search would prove difficult. Whoever sought to harm the twins had clearly planned carefully, using an innocent child as an unwitting instrument, rather than risking direct involvement themselves. That evening, as the keep settled into uneasy quiet following the day's revelations, Bjorn summoned Kaya to his private chambers, a request that carried none of the formal distance of their earlier interactions. She found him standing near the fire, his expression heavy with exhaustion, and something that looked almost like fear, an emotion she had never before witnessed from this powerful, composed king. Twice now, he said quietly, without turning to face her immediately. Twice you have stood between my children and those who would harm them, while my own guards, my own council, failed to notice the danger gathering around us. You cannot blame yourself for the actions of those who seek to harm your family through deception, Kaya said gently, moving closer. Perhaps not, Bjorn said, finally turning to face her, his pale eyes reflecting the firelight with an intensity that made her breath catch. But I find myself increasingly unable to imagine this keep, this kingdom, without your presence within it. Kaya's heart raced at the raw honesty in his words, at the vulnerability he allowed himself to show, only in these quiet, private moments.
Bjorn,
she whispered, uncertain what she wished to say, only certain that the careful distance they had maintained since her arrival had grown impossible to sustain any longer. I know what duty demands, he continued, closing the distance between them slowly. I know my council believes an alliance marriage would strengthen this kingdom's position. I have weighed that argument carefully, again and again, searching for the wisdom in it. And what have you concluded? Kaya asked softly, hardly daring to breathe. That I cannot imagine binding myself to another, when everything within me already recognizes the person I wish to stand beside, Bjorn said, his voice rough with emotion he no longer attempted to conceal. You arrived at my gates as a stranger fleeing cruelty you did not deserve. You have since become someone my children adore, someone whose courage has saved their lives not once but twice, someone whose presence within these walls has brought warmth back into a home that had grown cold with grief. Kaya felt tears gathering in her eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling in his words, feelings she had not dared to name even within the privacy of her own heart, fearful of hoping for something that might yet be stripped away by political necessity, or the harsh judgment of a world that had rarely shown her kindness. I am no queen, she whispered. I hold no lands, no alliances, no political value that your council would recognize as worthy of a king's mate. You hold something far more valuable, Bjorn said, reaching out to gently cup her face in his calloused hand, his touch tender, despite the roughness of his palms. You hold courage, and compassion, and a strength that has nothing to do with lineage or political leverage. Those are the qualities I wish to see reflected in whoever stands beside me, and whoever helps raise my children. Kaya leaned into his touch, unable to deny any longer the depth of connection that had grown between them, unable to pretend that her heart had not already claimed him, as thoroughly as his children had claimed her affection. The council will not accept this easily, she said softly. Solveig will fight against any decision that abandons the Eastern Alliance. Let her fight, Bjorn said firmly. I have spent 2 years allowing grief and duty to dictate every decision, every emotion, every quiet moment of my existence. I will not allow fear of my council's disapproval to dictate this, not when I finally recognize what, and who, I truly want. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, to voice hesitation, but Kaya remained still, her heart pounding with a hope she had never before allowed herself to feel. When his lips finally met hers, gentle and searching, she felt something long broken within her begin, tentatively, to mend. Outside the chamber door, unnoticed by either of them, Solveig stood frozen, having arrived to discuss urgent matters regarding the eastern border, only to witness a moment that confirmed her worst fears regarding the king's growing attachment to the unclaimed Omega, who had disrupted the careful political balance she had worked tirelessly to maintain. She turned away silently, her expression hardening with grim resolve. Whatever tender feelings had blossomed between the king and this stranger, she would not allow them to threaten the kingdom's security so easily. There remained other paths toward securing the alliance the kingdom required, paths that did not depend upon the king's willing cooperation. News of the king's growing affection for Kaya spread through the keep with the speed of wildfire, whispered in kitchens and corridors, debated openly among the guards, and discussed with increasing alarm within council chambers. What had begun as quiet gossip soon transformed into open concern among those who believed the kingdom's stability depended upon a strategically advantageous marriage. Kaya felt the shift in atmosphere immediately. Servants who had grown warm and familiar over the preceding weeks now regarded her with renewed caution, uncertain how to navigate a situation that had grown suddenly more complicated. The twins, blessedly innocent of political concerns, remained as affectionate as ever, though even Elsa mentioned overhearing troubling conversations among the older servants. "They say bad things about you," Elsa confided one afternoon, as Kaya helped her braid ribbons into her hair. "They say you are not good enough to be Papa's mate." Kaya's hands stilled briefly before resuming their gentle work. "People often fear what they do not understand," she said carefully, unwilling to burden the child with the full complexity of adult politics. "It does not mean their words hold truth." "I think you are good enough," Elsa declared firmly, twisting around to look at Kaya with the fierce loyalty only a child could offer so freely. "I think you are the best person Papa has brought home since Mama." Kaya's throat tightened with emotion, though she managed a soft smile for the little girl's benefit. "Thank you, little one. That means more to me than you know." Later that evening, Bjorn requested Kaya's presence in his study once more, though this time, his expression carried a heaviness that immediately set her on edge. She entered to find him standing near the window, his broad shoulders tense, a folded letter clutched in his hand. "What has happened?" she asked, closing the door behind her. "A formal delegation has arrived from the Ashford clan," Bjorn said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "They demand an audience regarding your status, and they have arrived with considerable escort, enough that turning them away without proper diplomatic engagement risks genuine conflict." Kaya's stomach dropped. "They have come themselves? Not simply another letter?" "Rowan Ashford himself leads the delegation," Bjorn confirmed grimly, "along with several council members and a contingent of warriors sufficient to make clear this matter carries serious weight for their clan, whatever their true motivations might be." Fear coiled through Kaya's chest at the mention of the Alpha, who had once cast her aside with such casual cruelty, now apparently willing to travel considerable distance and risk potential conflict to reclaim her. "What could they possibly want with me, after discarding me so publicly?" "That is precisely what we must discover," Bjorn said. "The council convenes tomorrow morning to hear their formal petition. I need you present, Kaya, to face whatever accusations they bring, and to offer your own account clearly and directly." "I will not return with them," Kaya said firmly, though fear still trembled beneath the resolve in her voice. "You will not be forced to," Bjorn promised, crossing the room to take her hands in his grip warm and steady against her sudden trembling. "Whatever they claim, whatever pressure they attempt to exert, I will not surrender you to a clan that treated you with such casual cruelty. But we must understand their true intentions before we can effectively counter them." The following morning, the great hall filled with tension as thick as smoke, council members arranged along one side of the chamber, the Ashford delegation standing stiffly opposite them. Kaya recognized Rowan immediately, his expression cold and calculating as his gaze found her across the crowded room, though she also noticed something new in his bearing, a wariness that had not existed during their previous encounter. "You have traveled far to press this claim," Bjorn said, his voice carrying the full authority of his position as he addressed the delegation. "I trust you carry evidence sufficient to justify such an extraordinary demand." Rowan stepped forward, his expression carefully composed despite the underlying tension evident in his stance. "Circumstances within our clan have changed since Kaya's departure," he said, choosing his words with obvious care. "Information has come to light, suggesting her banishment was based on false accusations, orchestrated by rivals, seeking to weaken our clan's standing through internal conflict." Kaya stared at him in disbelief, hardly daring to trust the implications of his words. "You are claiming my banishment was wrongful?" she asked, unable to keep the disbelief from her voice. I am, Rowan admitted, his jaw tight with what looked like genuine discomfort at the admission. The council member who first accused you of dishonoring our pack has since been revealed as having fabricated evidence to eliminate what he perceived as a rival influence within clan politics. He has since been removed from his position, and the clan wishes to formally correct the injustice done to you. The revelation left Kaya reeling, years of accepted shame and rejection suddenly cast into question by this unexpected admission. Why now? She asked, her voice trembling with a complicated mixture of vindication and lingering anger. Why did it take this long to uncover such deception? The truth emerged only recently. Through circumstances I will not burden this gathering with detailing, Rowan said. But once uncovered, I felt honor-bound to correct the wrong done to you, and to offer you the opportunity to return to Ashford territory, with your reputation fully restored. Kaya felt the weight of every eye in the hall upon her, waiting for her response to an offer that would have seemed like salvation only months earlier, an offer to reclaim the home and identity that had been stripped from her so cruelly. Yet now, standing within this unfamiliar kingdom, surrounded by people who had become far more precious to her than the clan that had once discarded her, the offer felt hollow, rather than redemptive. I appreciate the clan's acknowledgement of this injustice, Kaya said slowly, choosing her words with careful deliberation. But I have found a home here, among people who valued me not because political necessity demanded it, but because they chose to see my worth, despite knowing nothing of my history or lineage. I have no wish to return to a clan that discarded me so easily, regardless of how sincerely the correction is now offered. Murmurs rippled through the hall at her firm refusal, and she caught the flicker of surprise crossing Rowan's expression, clearly having anticipated a different response. Bjorn, standing nearby, made no attempt to hide the relief and pride evident in his own expression at her declaration. The decision belongs to Kaya alone, Bjorn said, addressing the delegation directly. She has made her wishes clear. I trust the Ashford clan will respect that choice, given the circumstances of her original banishment. Rowan hesitated, clearly weighing the political implications of pressing further against a kingdom he had likely hoped to avoid antagonizing. Finally, he inclined his head in reluctant acceptance. Very well, he said. We will respect Kaya's decision, though the offer remains open should circumstances ever change. As the delegation prepared to depart, having achieved neither the reclamation they had originally sought, nor any lasting diplomatic advantage, Kaya found herself approached quietly by one of the Ashford council members, an older woman whose expression carried something closer to genuine remorse than the calculated diplomacy displayed by Rowan. I am sorry for the role our clan played in your suffering, the woman said quietly, her voice barely audible above the general commotion of the delegation's departure. You deserved far better than the cruelty shown to you. Kaya studied the woman's face, searching for any trace of insincerity, but found only genuine regret. Thank you, she said softly. That means more than you might realize. As the Ashford delegation finally departed, riding back toward the southern territories from which they had come, Kaya felt an unexpected weight lift from her shoulders, a burden of shame and rejection she had carried for years, finally beginning to dissolve. She had faced her past directly, had refused the offer to reclaim an identity that no longer fit who she had become, and had chosen instead the uncertain but genuine future she had begun building within these northern walls. Bjorn found her later that evening, standing once more on the familiar balcony overlooking the frozen river, her expression contemplative in the fading light. You surprised them, he said, joining her at the railing. I do not think Rowan anticipated you would refuse such an offer. I surprised myself in some ways, Kaya admitted. For years, I dreamed of exactly this moment, of vindication, of proof that the accusations against me were false. Yet when it finally arrived, I found I no longer wanted what it offered. What do you want instead? Bjorn asked softly, his gaze intent upon her face. Kaya turned to meet his eyes, her heart steady with a certainty she had never before allowed herself to feel so completely. This, she said simply. You, your children, the home we have begun building together, however uncertain the path forward might remain. Bjorn's expression softened with an emotion too profound for words, and he pulled her gently into his arms, holding her close beneath the darkening sky, both of them acutely aware that whatever challenges still lay ahead, they would face them together, bound now by choice rather than circumstance, by genuine affection rather than political necessity. Despite the resolution with the Ashford delegation, tension within the keep did not fully dissipate. Solveig continued pressing her arguments regarding the Eastern Alliance with renewed urgency, her concerns sharpened rather than softened by the increasingly obvious bond between the king and Kaya. "My king," Solveig said, during a council session Kaya had been permitted to observe, "the Eastern territories have grown impatient awaiting your decision. Their ambassador has indicated that continued delay may be interpreted as disinterest, potentially driving them toward alliance with rival kingdoms instead." "I have given my answer regarding the Eastern Alliance," Bjorn said firmly, his patience visibly thinning after weeks of repeated pressure on the same subject. "I will not pursue a marriage contract for the sake of political convenience when it conflicts with matters of genuine importance to me personally." "With respect," another council member interjected, an older man named Torvald who had served as Bjorn's advisor since childhood. "Personal matters cannot always take precedence over the security of an entire kingdom. The raids along our eastern border continue unabated. Our defenses remain stretched thin. The eastern territories offer not merely political advantage, but genuine military support we desperately need." Kaya listened silently from her position near the chamber's edge, understanding the legitimate weight behind Torvald's concerns, even as her heart ached at the possibility that duty might yet force Bjorn toward a path neither of them wished to walk. "There are other means of securing military support beyond marriage alliance," Bjorn argued. "Trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, diplomatic negotiations that do not require binding myself to another for the sake of strategic advantage. Such alternatives require time we may not possess," Solveig countered. "The raiders grow bolder with each passing week. If this pattern continues, we risk losing entire settlements before slower diplomatic channels can secure the support we need." The debate continued for hours, each side presenting increasingly urgent arguments, until finally, Bjorn called an end to the discussion, promising careful consideration, but refusing to commit to any immediate decision. As the council dispersed, Kaya caught the troubled expression lingering on his face, the weight of competing obligations clearly bearing down upon him more heavily than he wished to admit. That night, as she prepared for sleep, a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Bjorn standing in the corridor, his expression grave. "There is news," he said, without preamble. "Scouts have returned, with word of a significant raider force gathering near our eastern border, far larger than any previous incursion. If their intelligence proves accurate, we face a threat unlike anything this kingdom has encountered in recent memory." Kaya's breath caught with alarm. "What does this mean for the kingdom's defenses?" "It means difficult decisions must be made quickly," Bjorn said, running a tired hand through his hair. "My council will press even harder now for the Eastern Alliance, arguing that we cannot face this threat without additional military support." "And what do you believe?" Kaya asked softly. Bjorn was quiet for a long moment, his expression conflicted. "I believe my people's safety must come first," he said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of leadership. "Whatever personal cost that decision demands." Kaya felt her heart clench painfully at the implication behind his words, understanding all too well what he was struggling to say. "If the alliance is truly necessary to protect your kingdom," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the ache building within her chest, "then you must pursue it, regardless of what it costs, either of us personally." "Kaya, your people depend upon you," she continued, cutting off whatever protest he had been preparing to offer. "Your children depend upon a kingdom that remains safe and stable. I will not stand as an obstacle to decisions necessary for their protection." Bjorn stepped closer, his expression pained. "Do you truly believe I could simply set aside what has grown between us, as though it holds no weight against political calculation?" "I believe you are a good king," Kaya said softly, tears gathering despite her efforts to remain composed. "And good kings sometimes must make sacrifices that break their own hearts for the sake of those who depend upon them." "There must be another way," Bjorn said, though his voice carried less certainty than his words suggested. "Let me consult further with my most trusted advisors, explore every alternative, before accepting that sacrifice, as the only path forward. Kaya nodded, though privately she feared the mounting threat along the border would leave little room for alternatives, however much either of them wished otherwise. She spent the following days in quiet anguish, watching Bjorn disappear into extended strategy sessions, watching the atmosphere within the keep grow increasingly tense, as reports of the gathering raider force continued arriving with troubling regularity. The twins, sensing the shifting mood despite their young age, grew clingier than usual, seeking Kaya's presence with an urgency that suggested they too sensed something precarious building around their small, fragile world. "Will you have to leave?" Elsa asked one evening, her small face troubled as Kaya tucked her into bed. "I do not know, little one," Kaya admitted honestly, unwilling to offer false comfort that might later prove hollow. "Whatever happens, know that you and your brother have meant everything to me these past months." "I do not want you to leave," Elsa said, tears welling in her eyes. "I want you to stay forever, and be my new mama." Kaya's own eyes filled with tears at the child's simple, heartfelt declaration. "I want that too," she whispered, gathering the little girl into her arms. "More than you could possibly know." The following morning, an urgent summons called Kaya to the great hall, where she found the entire council assembled, expressions grave and tense. Bjorn stood at the head of the gathering, his posture rigid with barely contained emotion. "The Eastern Territories have sent formal terms," Torvald announced, his voice heavy with the weight of the moment. "They offer full military support against the gathering raider threat, in exchange for the king's commitment to marriage with their princess within the season." Kaya felt the floor seem to tilt beneath her feet, the reality of the moment crashing down with devastating finality. She had known this possibility loomed, had even encouraged Bjorn to consider it if necessary, but hearing the formal terms spoken aloud transformed abstract fear into painful, immediate reality. "The threat along our border grows more dire with each passing day," Solveig said, her tone carrying genuine urgency rather than mere political maneuvering. "Without additional support, we risk losing entire settlements, entire families, to raiders who have shown no mercy toward the innocent." Bjorn's gaze found Kaya's across the crowded hall, his expression a devastating mixture of anguish and resolve, and she understood, with sinking certainty, exactly what he was preparing to say. "I will consider the terms carefully," he said finally, his voice carrying none of its usual confident authority, roughened instead by an emotion he could not fully conceal. "Given the severity of the threat we face, I cannot dismiss this offer without serious deliberation." The council murmured their approval, satisfied that pragmatic necessity appeared to be winning out over what many had viewed as an inappropriate personal attachment. Kaya stood frozen at the edge of the hall, her heart breaking silently as she watched the man she had come to love weigh the fate of his kingdom against the fragile happiness they had only just begun to discover together. She did not wait to hear further discussion. Instead, she slipped quietly from the hall, needing solitude to process the devastating possibility now looming over everything she had allowed herself to hope for since arriving, half frozen and utterly alone, at the gates of this kingdom so many months before. 2 days after the council's grim announcement, disaster struck without warning. The raider force that scouts had tracked gathering near the eastern border launched a sudden, coordinated assault that far exceeded anything the kingdom's defenses had anticipated. Riders arrived at the keep in the dead of night, breathless and bloodied, bearing news that sent the entire settlement into immediate, desperate motion. "They have breached the outer settlements," the lead rider gasped, barely able to stand from exhaustion. "Hundreds of warriors, better organized than any raiding party we have faced before." They moved toward the keep itself. Bjorn's expression hardened into cold, focused determination as he immediately began issuing orders, rousing every able warrior within the keep, arming the walls, preparing for a defense that would test the kingdom's strength as never before. Kaya found herself swept into the chaos, her healing skills immediately called upon as wounded warriors and villagers began streaming into the keep, seeking shelter and treatment. She worked alongside Margit through the remainder of the night, treating wounds, calming frightened children, doing everything within her power to support the desperate defense unfolding beyond the keep's walls. The sounds of battle echoed distantly, the clash of steel, and the shouts of warriors carrying on the cold night air, each distant clamor sending fresh waves of fear through those sheltering within. As dawn broke gray and smoke streaked over the horizon, Word reached the keep that the raiders had pushed dangerously close to the settlement's inner defenses, overwhelming the kingdom's warriors through sheer numbers despite their superior training. Kaya's heart clenched with terror at the news, her thoughts immediately turning to the twins, who remained sequestered within the keep's most secure chambers under heavy guard. She made her way toward their quarters despite Margit's protests, needing to see with her own eyes that the children remained safe amid the mounting chaos. She found Eric and Elsa huddled together, their nurse doing her best to project calm despite the evident fear in her own expression. "Kaya!" Elsa cried, rushing into her arms the moment she entered. "Is Papa safe? Is he going to be hurt?" "Your father is one of the strongest warriors this kingdom has ever known," Kaya said, forcing steadiness into her voice, despite her own churning fear. "He will do everything within his power to protect this kingdom, and to return to you both safely." As if summoned by her words, the sound of fighting suddenly grew alarmingly close, shouts and clashing steel echoing from somewhere within the keep itself rather than beyond its walls. Kaya's blood ran cold with the realization that raiders had somehow breached the outer defenses and penetrated into the keep proper. "Stay here," she instructed the nurse firmly, positioning herself near the chamber's entrance. "Bar this door once I leave, and do not open it for anyone except the king himself." She emerged into the corridor to find chaos unfolding, servants fleeing in panic, guards rushing to intercept a small contingent of raiders who had somehow slipped through the outer defenses during the confusion of the larger battle. Kaya pressed herself against the wall, searching desperately for a path back toward the twins' chamber that would not expose her to the fighting. A raider rounded the corner directly into her path, his weapon already raised, his expression feral with battle fury. Kaya had no weapon, no training in combat beyond the desperate instinct that had once saved the twins from a similar threat, but she refused to simply surrender to fear. She grabbed a heavy ceremonial shield hanging on the nearby wall, using it to deflect the raider's initial strike, the impact jarring painfully through her arms, but keeping the blade from finding its mark. She shouted for guards as she backed toward the twins' chamber, determined to buy whatever time she could to protect the children sheltering within. The raider pressed his advantage, his superior strength and training evident despite Kaya's desperate defense. She stumbled backward, the shield growing heavier with each block strike, her strength beginning to fail against the relentless assault. Just as she felt certain she could not sustain the defense any longer, a familiar figure crashed into the corridor, intercepting the raider with brutal, decisive force. Bjorn fought with a ferocity that spoke of every fear and determination driving him, his blade moving with lethal precision as he ended the threat within seconds, his chest heaving with exertion and barely restrained fury as he turned toward Kaya.
"Are you injured?"
he demanded, his hands moving over her immediately, checking for wounds despite the ongoing chaos surrounding them. "I am unharmed," Kaya assured him, though her arms trembled from the strain of the desperate defense. "The children remain safe within their chamber. I was attempting to return to them when I encountered this raider." Bjorn's expression softened briefly with relief, before hardening once more into fierce determination. "The main assault continues beyond the walls. I must return to lead the defense, but I cannot leave you and the children unprotected." "Go," Kaya urged him. "I will remain with the twins until the threat has passed. Your kingdom needs its king, leading the defense far more than it needs me protected within these walls." Bjorn studied her for a long, charged moment, clearly torn between duty and the desperate desire to ensure her safety personally. Finally, he pressed a fierce, brief kiss against her lips before turning to summon additional guards to secure the corridor and protect the children's chamber. "Return to me," Kaya called after him as he strode back toward the battle. "Whatever it takes, return to me." "Always," he promised, before disappearing back into the chaos of the ongoing defense. The battle raged for hours, the sounds of fighting gradually shifting from the keep's interior back toward the outer walls, as reinforcements arrived to repel the raiders who had breached the initial defenses. Kaya remained with the twins throughout, offering what comfort she could, while her own heart pounded with fear for Bjorn's safety, for the fate of the kingdom that had become her home, in ways she had never anticipated when she first arrived seeking mere shelter from a storm. As afternoon light finally broke through the smoke hanging over the settlement, word reached the keep that the raider force had been successfully repelled, driven back from the kingdom's borders, through the combined efforts of every warrior who had answered the desperate call to defend their homes. The victory had come at considerable cost, with many warriors wounded and several settlements damaged by the initial assault, but the kingdom itself had held. Kaya rushed from the twins' chamber the moment word arrived that it was safe to do so, desperate to find Bjorn, amid the exhausted warriors returning from the battle's aftermath. She found him near the keep's entrance, blood staining his armor, exhaustion evident in every line of his powerful frame, but alive and whole, and searching the crowd with equal desperation, until his eyes found hers. She crossed the distance between them without hesitation, throwing herself into his arms despite the blood and grime covering his armor, overwhelmed with relief at his safe return. Bjorn held her fiercely, his own relief evident in the way his arms tightened around her, unwilling to release her even as concerned advisors pressed close, seeking his attention regarding the aftermath of the battle. "You fought at my side today, in every way that mattered," Bjorn murmured against her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "You protected my children, while I fought to protect this kingdom. There is no clearer evidence of where your loyalty truly lies, whatever accusations my council might have once considered against you." Kaya pulled back slightly, searching his exhausted face, understanding intuitively that the battle just concluded had shifted something fundamental within the political calculations that had threatened to separate them. "What does this mean?" she asked carefully. "For the Eastern Alliance, for the marriage terms your council was considering." Bjorn's expression grew resolute despite his exhaustion. "It means my kingdom has proven, through the courage of its people, rather than political marriage, that we possess the strength necessary to defend ourselves against threats, both from beyond our borders and, apparently, from within our own walls. Whatever alliance we pursue going forward will be built on genuine partnership, not desperate necessity." Around them, exhausted warriors and grateful villagers began to gather, word spreading quickly of Kaya's fierce defense of the royal children during the chaos of the breach, of her steadfast courage that had once again placed her between danger and those she had come to love. Whatever lingering suspicion had followed her throughout her time within the kingdom seemed, in this moment of shared relief and gratitude, to finally begin dissolving into something far warmer. Even Solveig, approaching cautiously through the gathered crowd, regarded Kaya with an expression that had shifted from calculated suspicion into something closer to reluctant respect. "You have proven your loyalty to this kingdom beyond any doubt today," she said quietly, her tone carrying genuine acknowledgement rather than mere political courtesy. "I withdraw my objections regarding your place within these walls." Kaya nodded gratefully, though her attention remained largely fixed upon Bjorn, upon the exhausted but determined expression that promised whatever challenges still remained ahead, they would face them together, their bond forged now not merely through quiet affection, but through shared courage in the face of genuine danger. As evening settled over the battle's scarred but ultimately triumphant kingdom, Bjorn drew Kaya aside from the ongoing recovery efforts, his expression carrying a seriousness that immediately captured her full attention. "I have made my decision," he said quietly, "regarding matters my council has pressed upon me these past weeks." Kaya held her breath, uncertain what to expect after the harrowing events of the day, though something in his steady gaze offered fragile hope. "I will not pursue the Eastern Alliance," Bjorn said firmly. "Not through marriage, at least. Today has proven that this kingdom's true strength lies not in political contracts, but in the courage and loyalty of those who call it home. I choose to build our future through genuine partnership rather than desperate necessity, and I choose to build that future with you, if you will still have me, despite everything this position and this life demands." Kaya felt tears of relief and overwhelming joy gathering in her eyes, the fragile hope she had scarcely allowed herself to nurture, finally blossoming into something certain and unshakable. "I have wanted nothing else since the moment I first understood the depth of what had grown between us," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Whatever challenges remain, whatever your council might still argue, I choose this future with you as well." Bjorn's expression transformed, with a joy Kaya had not yet witnessed from him, the weight of grief and duty that had shadowed him since Freya's passing, finally lifting to reveal genuine, unguarded happiness. He pulled her close once more, and this time, amid the settling dust of battle and the first fragile stirrings of peace, their kiss carried none of the desperate urgency of stolen moments, but instead the steady certainty of a future, finally, truly chosen. Word of the king's decision spread through the kingdom within days, carried by grateful villagers who had witnessed Kaya's courage firsthand during the desperate battle, and by warriors who spoke admiringly of the Omega who had stood fearlessly between danger and the royal children not once, but twice. What had begun as suspicion and reluctant tolerance transformed steadily into genuine affection and respect among the people who called this northern kingdom home. The formal announcement came 3 weeks later, during a great gathering held within the keep's largest hall, filled with warriors, villagers, and dignitaries from neighboring territories, curious to witness the king's long-anticipated decision regarding his future. Kaya stood nervously near the hall's entrance, dressed in fine northern garments gifted to her by Ellen and the other women of the keep who had, in the aftermath of the battle, welcomed her fully into their community. "You look beautiful," Ellen whispered, adjusting the delicate silver circlet resting atop Kaya's carefully braided hair. "Nervous?" "Terrified," Kaya admitted with a shaky laugh. "I never imagined, when I fled Ashford territory with nothing but the clothes on my back, that I would find myself standing here today. Life carries strange and wonderful surprises for those brave enough to survive its hardships," Ellen said warmly. "You have earned every bit of happiness awaiting you." The great doors swung open, and Kaya walked forward into the crowded hall, her heart pounding as every eye turned toward her, though this time, the attention carried none of the suspicion and judgment she had once feared so deeply. Instead, she saw warmth and respect and genuine welcome reflected in the faces surrounding her as she made her way toward the raised platform where Bjorn awaited, resplendent in ceremonial armor, his expression radiant with a happiness that had been absent from his bearing for far too long. Beside him stood Eric and Elsa, dressed in their finest clothing, their small faces glowing with excitement as they watched Kaya approach. Elsa could barely contain herself, practically bouncing with anticipation, while Eric maintained a more composed dignity that nonetheless could not fully suppress his obvious joy. Kaya climbed the platform steps, taking her place beside Bjorn as he turned to address the assembled crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "Many of you know the story of how Kaya first arrived within our kingdom's borders," he began, his gaze warm as it rested upon her. "A stranger fleeing injustice, seeking nothing more than shelter from a storm. What she found instead, and what she has given in return, has transformed not only my own life, but the life of this entire kingdom." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Kaya felt tears gathering as she listened to Bjorn recount, briefly, the courage she had shown in protecting his children, the loyalty she had demonstrated, even when political pressure and lingering suspicion might have driven a lesser person away. "I stand before you today," Bjorn continued, "not merely as your king announcing a political decision, but as a man who has found, against all expectation, a partner worthy of standing beside him, through whatever challenges the future holds. Kaya has earned her place within this kingdom, not through lineage or political alliance, but through courage, compassion, and unwavering loyalty that I have witnessed time and again." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his pale eyes bright with emotion as he continued speaking, his voice now carrying an intimacy that made the surrounding crowd fade into background awareness. "Kaya, from the moment you stood between my children and danger, asking nothing in return, I recognized something within you that I had feared I might never find again after losing Freya. I recognized someone whose heart matched the strength of their courage, someone I could trust, not merely with my kingdom's safety, but with my own heart, and the hearts of my children." Kaya felt tears spilling freely now, unable to contain the overwhelming emotion building within her chest, as Bjorn continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability evident in his words. "I ask you, before this entire kingdom as witness, to accept my claim, not as a political convenience, but as a genuine choice, made with my whole heart. Will you stand beside me, Kaya, as my mate, as queen of this kingdom, and as mother to Arik and Elsa, for as long as we both shall live?" The hall fell into hushed anticipation as Kaya struggled to find words adequate to the depth of emotion overwhelming her. She thought of the humiliation she had suffered at Ashford territory, the desperate flight through the storm, the uncertain days that had followed as she fought to prove her worth within an unfamiliar kingdom. She thought of the twins who had claimed her heart so completely, of Bjorn's steady strength and unexpected tenderness, of a home she had never dared hope to find again after losing everything she once knew. "Yes," she whispered, then repeated more firmly, as tears of joy streamed down her face. "Yes. With all my heart, I choose this future with you." The hall erupted into cheers and applause, the sound echoing off the ancient wooden beams, as Bjorn pulled Kaya into his arms, sealing their commitment with a kiss that carried none of the uncertainty and caution that had once shadowed their growing bond, but instead, the full, unguarded joy of a future, finally secured, through genuine choice, rather than desperate circumstance. Elsa and Eric rushed forward the moment the kiss ended, wrapping themselves around Kaya's legs with unrestrained excitement, and she knelt immediately to gather both children into her embrace, tears and laughter mixing freely, as the family she had never expected to find fully claimed her as their own. "You are truly going to be our mama now?" Elsa asked, her small face glowing with happiness. "Truly and forever," Kaya confirmed, pressing gentle kisses to both children's foreheads. "For as long as you will have me." "Forever," Eric said solemnly, though his usual composure could not fully hide the wide, genuine smile spreading across his young face. In the weeks that followed, Kaya settled fully into her new role within the kingdom, the formal mating ceremony conducted according to northern tradition, beneath the same stars that had witnessed her first quiet conversations with Bjorn upon the balcony, overlooking the frozen river. The kingdom celebrated for 3 full days, warriors and villagers alike joining in feasts and festivities that stretched from dawn until well past dusk, the collective joy of a community that had weathered genuine hardship together, now free to celebrate the unexpected happiness that had emerged from such difficult circumstances. Even Solveig, who had once viewed Kaya with such open suspicion, approached her during the celebrations with an expression of genuine warmth. "I misjudged you," she admitted quietly. "I saw only the uncertainty your presence introduced into carefully calculated political strategy. I failed to see, until circumstances forced clarity upon me, the genuine strength and loyalty you carried within you all along. Your caution came from genuine concern for this kingdom's welfare," Kaya said graciously. "I hold no resentment for questions that ultimately protected the people you serve so faithfully." As the celebrations finally began winding down, Kaya found herself once more upon the familiar balcony, Bjorn beside her, the twins finally asleep after days of excited festivities, the frozen river below reflecting starlight just as it had during that first quiet conversation months before, when she had been nothing more than an injured stranger, uncertain of her welcome within these walls. "Do you regret it?" Bjorn asked softly, his arm wrapped securely around her shoulders, "leaving behind everything familiar, however painful, to build this new life among strangers, who initially offered you nothing but suspicion?" Kaya leaned into his embrace, considering the question seriously before answering. "I regret the cruelty that forced my departure from Ashford territory," she said honestly, "but I could never regret where that painful journey ultimately led me. I found not merely shelter from a storm, but a home, a family, and a love I had never dared to hope for after years of rejection and isolation. And I found someone whose courage and compassion reminded me that strength and gentleness need not exist as opposites," Bjorn said quietly. "Someone who taught my children, and myself, that healing from grief does not mean forgetting what came before, but rather choosing to remain open to whatever joy the future might yet offer." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars reflect across the frozen river, both acutely aware that whatever challenges still awaited them as king and queen of a kingdom facing an uncertain world, they would face those challenges together, bound now by genuine love rather than mere circumstance, by a choice made freely rather than demanded by necessity. Kaya thought back, one final time, to the frightened, exhausted woman who had stumbled into this kingdom, seeking nothing more than temporary shelter from a brutal storm. She could never have imagined, during those desperate hours fleeing through unfamiliar forest, that she would find not merely safety, but a family who valued her completely, a king who cherished her not despite her scars, but because of the strength that had carried her through them, and children who had claimed her heart as thoroughly as she had claimed theirs. The Omega, once scorned and cast aside, had found, against every expectation, a home worthy of the courage that had carried her through every hardship. And as she stood beside Bjorn, beneath the vast northern sky, surrounded finally by genuine belonging rather than mere tolerance, Kaya understood with complete certainty that whatever the future held, she would face it not as an outcast seeking mere survival, but as a queen, a mother, and a mate, cherished fully for exactly who she was. The end.